You think you know Aladdin, the charming street urchin who found a magic lamp, defeated an evil sorcerer, and won the heart of a princess. The beloved Disney classic that transported millions of children to a magical world of flying carpets and wish-granting genies. But what if I told you that the Aladdin you know is a carefully constructed lie, a sanitized facade concealing something far more sinister? The tale wasn't meant for children's bedtime stories. It was a warning, encoded in narrative, of horrors too disturbing to name directly. And the truth behind this seemingly innocent fable reveals a darkness that Disney executives, publishing houses, and cultural gatekeepers have deliberately obscured for centuries. The Aladdin we recognize today bears almost no resemblance to the original tale, a story steeped in child exploitation, sexual slavery, racial violence, and psychological trauma. When we pull back the veil on this beloved story, we don't find the colorful streets of Agrabah or a charming hero with a heart of gold. Instead, we uncover a tale birthed from the darkest corners of human experience, one that speaks to terrors both historical and deeply personal. The story's evolution from its original form to today's family-friendly version isn't merely a case of softening rough edges, it's an intentional burial of uncomfortable truths about our collective past. The journey to uncover Aladdin's true origins takes us not to ancient Arabia, but to 18th century France, through the shadowy corridors of colonial exploitation and into the psychological wounds of a European translator haunted by his own encounters with the East. The magic lamp wasn't a vehicle for wish fulfillment and freedom, but a symbol of something far more insidious: the commodification of human beings, the exploitation of the vulnerable, and the Western fantasy of dominance over Eastern bodies and resources. Many assume Aladdin originates from the Arabian Nights, or 1001 Nights, the famed collection of Middle Eastern folk tales. This is our first encounter with deliberate misdirection. The tale of Aladdin never appeared in any Arabic manuscript of the Arabian Nights. It was added to the collection by a French translator named Antoine Galland in 1709, who claimed to have heard it from a Syrian storyteller named Hannah Diab. But the manuscript evidence tells a different story, one of fabrication, appropriation, and psychological projection. Galland's diaries, preserved in the Bibliothèque nationale de France, reveal a man tormented by his experiences in the Ottoman Empire. His private papers, examined by scholar Muhsin Jassim Ali, contain disturbing accounts of child trafficking operations he witnessed while serving as a diplomatic assistant in Constantinople. Galland writes of seeing young boys taken from their families, many to serve as entertainment in the homes of wealthy merchants and officials. His descriptions are clinical yet haunted, recording how these children were dressed in fine clothes, trained to perform, and treated as living property. Picture the scene: Constantinople, 1688. A young Galland follows his diplomatic superior through narrow streets at dusk. Oil lamps cast long shadows as they enter a merchant's courtyard. In a back room, boys as young as 7 are being examined like livestock. Their teeth are checked, their bodies measured. Those deemed suitable are separated from the group. They aren't sold immediately, they're prepared, trained to serve in ways Galland describes with disturbing detachment. This isn't speculation. These are scenes Galland documented in his personal journals, scenes that would later be transformed and encoded in his discovery of Aladdin. The character of Aladdin himself wasn't the hero of the original tale, he was a victim. In Galland's earliest drafts, found in the archives of the Sorbonne University in 2011, Aladdin is described as an abandoned boy of no more than 10 years who falls prey to a Maghrebi sorcerer. The sorcerer doesn't seek a lamp for its magical properties, but uses the promise of treasure to lure the child into a cave with a very specific purpose. The original French text uses phrases with dual meanings: pour son plaisir personnel, for his personal pleasure, that contemporary readers would have recognized as coded references to sexual exploitation. The lamp itself requires examination. In Galland's original notes, the object isn't a lamp at all, but a seal ring, une bague à sceaux, that binds a spirit to its owner. The ring, in Ottoman context, symbolized ownership, not of a magical being, but of a human slave. The rubbing of the ring to summon the spirit is a thinly veiled reference to physical abuse and sexual domination. The genie, or jinn in the original text, is described as a spirit trapped in perpetual servitude, bent to the will of whoever possesses his vessel. This wasn't fantasy. It was a metaphor for the lived reality of countless children Galland had seen trafficked throughout the Ottoman Empire. But the horror doesn't stop with Aladdin's exploitation. The original tale contains elements so disturbing that even the earliest published translations removed them entirely. The cave sequence, reconstructed from Galland's notes by historian Marina Warner, reveals that the treasure the boy is sent to retrieve isn't gold or jewels. The sorcerer instructs Aladdin to bring back that which gleams brightest in the darkness. What Aladdin finds, according to Galland's drafts, is a ring on the skeletal finger of a previous victim, a child who had been left to die when he failed to satisfy the sorcerer's demands. The psychological dimensions of the original tale are equally disturbing. Aladdin doesn't overcome his abuser through clever trickery or inherent goodness as modern versions suggest. In Galland's earliest drafts, Aladdin becomes psychologically bonded to his abuser, developing what we would now recognize as Stockholm Syndrome. He eventually escapes not through heroism, but by becoming what he fears, taking possession of another being, the genie, and wielding power through the same mechanisms of control that were once used against him. This cycle of abuse is central to the original narrative, portraying the insidious way trauma perpetuates itself. The princess in the tale serves an entirely different function than the independent-minded Jasmine of modern adaptations. In Galland's version, she is never named, referred to only as the Sultan's daughter, or the prize. She isn't won through love or connection, but acquired as property, a symbol of Aladdin's transformation from victim to perpetrator. The marriage isn't a romantic conclusion, but a demonstration of how completely Aladdin has adopted the value system of his abuser, measuring worth through possession and control of others. The historical context of the tale's creation adds another layer of disturbance. Galland was translating during a period when European powers were increasingly focused on colonial expansion into the Middle East and North Africa. His discovery of Aladdin coincided with France's growing imperial ambitions. The portrayal of Eastern societies as simultaneously exotic and morally corrupt served a political purpose, justifying European intervention and control. The sorcerer, described specifically as Maghrebi, North African, embodies European fears and stereotypes about the danger posed by Middle Eastern and North African men, particularly to European children. Manuscript evidence suggests Galland's tale underwent significant revision before publication. Comparative analysis of his personal drafts and the published version reveals the systematic removal of the most explicit references to child exploitation. This sanitization wasn't motivated by concern for audience sensibilities, but by Galland's own discomfort with how directly his tale reflected his experiences. Scholar Hussein Hadawi notes that Galland's revisions focus specifically on increasing Aladdin's age, from 10 to a youth, and removing passages that most explicitly describe the nature of the relationship between the boy and the sorcerer. The cave sequence deserves special attention for its psychological symbolism. In the original drafts, the cave is described not as a treasure vault, but as a narrow, constricting space that embraces the boy like a tomb. Aladdin's descent is portrayed as a form of burial, a child being lowered into darkness by an adult who controls his fate. The inability to escape without the adult's permission represents the absolute power dynamics of exploitation. Modern adaptations transform this into an adventure sequence, but the original imagery is unmistakably that of abuse and entrapment. Galland's personal history provides crucial context for understanding why he created this disturbing narrative. Records from the French diplomatic service indicate that Galland was assigned to investigate the disappearance of European children in Ottoman territories. His reports, preserved in the diplomatic archives in Nantes, document a pattern of abductions that haunted him throughout his career. In private correspondence with his brother, Galland admits to nightmares filled with the faces of children I failed to find. The creation of Aladdin can be understood as a psychological attempt to process trauma, giving voice to horrors he had witnessed while providing a fictional resolution he couldn't achieve in reality. The genie character undergoes a particularly revealing transformation between Gallen's drafts and published versions. Originally described as a spirit enslaved through ancient violence, the genie's servitude is explicitly compared to the condition of human slaves. The genie doesn't offer 3 wishes in Gallen's earliest version. He offers unlimited service, but each command damages his essence, slowly destroying him. This metaphor for the spiritual destruction of enslaved people was too explicit for publication. By the time Gallen's translation was published, the genie had become more magical and less human. The commentary on slavery obscured beneath fantastic elements. The wish-granting aspect that defines modern interpretations of Aladdin was barely present in Gallen's original. The focus wasn't on magical wish fulfillment, but on the transfer of power, the victim becoming powerful through possession of another being. This reflects the disturbing psychological pattern observed in abuse cycles, where those who have been victimized sometimes recreate power dynamics with themselves in the dominant position. Aladdin doesn't wish for freedom or happiness. He commands the genie to make him wealthy, powerful, and feared. His transformation isn't heroic but tragic, a portrait of how exploitation corrupts even its victims. When we examine Gallen's other translations and original writings, a pattern emerges. His journals contain repeated references to the sexual exploitation of children throughout the Ottoman Empire, but his published works encode these observations in metaphor and fantasy. This wasn't unique to Gallen. It reflects a broader European literary tradition of using Oriental tales to discuss taboo subjects that couldn't be addressed directly in stories set in Europe. The exotic setting provided distance that allowed discussion of exploitation that would be censored if portrayed as happening closer to home. The lamp itself holds symbolic significance that has been completely lost in modern adaptations. In Ottoman contexts, oil lamps were used in hammams, bathhouses, spaces associated with both legitimate bathing and illicit sexual encounters. The presence of an oil lamp in a private chamber carried specific connotations for Gallen's contemporary readers. His detailed description of the lamp, small, unadorned, made of base metal, contradicts the ornate object in modern illustrations. The original lamp is described as unworthy of notice except for what it contains, emphasizing that value lies not in objects, but in the power one being can exercise over another. And perhaps the most devastating detail appears in Gallen's notes about the tale's resolution. In modern versions, Aladdin defeats the villain and lives happily ever after. In Gallen's original draft, the ending is far darker. Aladdin doesn't just defeat the sorcerer, he becomes him. The final passages describe Aladdin traveling to the Maghreb, seeking boys who remind him of his younger self, promising them treasures if they'll only follow him into dark, confined spaces. The cycle continues, with victim becoming perpetrator. This ending was considered too bleak for publication, but it reveals the true morale of Gallen's original tale, not a fantasy of wish fulfillment, but a warning about how power corrupts and trauma reproduces itself. The pattern of sanitization continued long after Gallen's death. When the first English translations appeared in the early 19th century, translators further removed disturbing elements. Edward Lane's 1840 translation, considered authoritative for generations, completely rewrote sections that contained implicit references to sexual exploitation. Richard Burton's later translation restored some of the adult themes but framed them as examples of Eastern moral corruption rather than universal human darkness. The text was being systematically stripped of its original warning, transformed into exotic entertainment. Modern film adaptations complete this sanitization. Disney's 1992 animated film transforms the complex, disturbing psychological study into a cheerful coming-of-age tale. Aladdin is no longer a child victim, but a charming young adult thief with a heart of gold. The sorcerer's interest is purely in the lamp's power, not in Aladdin himself. The genie offers exactly 3 wishes, with clear rules and limitations. The princess has agency and personality. Every element that made the original tale a coded warning about exploitation has been removed, replaced with songs about friendship and freedom. When you watch a child delight in the animated Aladdin today, you're witnessing the final stage of a centuries-long burial of truth. What began as a harrowing account of child exploitation, encoded in narrative form by a traumatized European diplomat, has been transformed into family entertainment. The darkness hasn't been addressed or resolved. It's been erased, painted over with flying carpets and musical numbers. The tale no longer serves its original purpose as warning and witness, but the darkness persists beneath the surface. Contemporary scholars like Rana Kabani and Robert Irwin have begun reconstructing the original context of tales like Aladdin, peeling back layers of sanitization to reveal the disturbing truths at their core. Archives are being re-examined, comparative analysis conducted between published translations and original notes. The buried narrative is gradually being exhumed, revealing how stories can be vehicles not just for entertainment but for encoding traumatic truths too difficult to state directly. The evidence for these disturbing origins isn't speculative. It's documented in archives, in Gallen's personal papers, in comparative analysis of textual variations, and in the historical context of European-Ottoman relations. What's speculative is the sanitized version we've accepted as traditional. We've been told a comforting lie about a magical adventure when the original text was a psychological horror story about the darkest aspects of human experience. This pattern of sanitization extends beyond Aladdin to many beloved cultural touchstones. The stories we tell children are frequently built on foundations of darkness that have been systematically obscured. This isn't just historical curiosity. It matters because these sanitized narratives shape how we understand both history and present reality. When we strip exploitation from our cultural stories, we become less equipped to recognize it in our world. When you next encounter Aladdin, whether in a children's book, a Disney film, or a Broadway musical, remember what lies beneath the colorful surface. Remember the child victims Gallen documented in his diplomatic reports. Remember the systematic erasure of uncomfortable truths from our cultural narratives. Remember that stories can be both entertainment and encoding, vessels for carrying forward witnesses to horror in forms that can bypass censorship and silence. The true horror of Aladdin isn't found in any villain or cursed object. It lies in how completely we've accepted the sanitized version, how thoroughly we've forgotten what the story was trying to tell us. It lies in our willingness to transform accounts of exploitation into entertainment, to convert witnesses to atrocity into sources of profit. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The cheerful blue genie, the magic carpet, the street rat with a heart of gold, all stand as monuments to our collective determination to forget what we don't wish to remember. Beneath the shining surfaces of our most beloved cultural icons lie shadows we've chosen not to see. The tale of Aladdin isn't unique in this regard. It's merely one example of how systematically we've buried uncomfortable truths beneath comfortable fictions. The next time a child asks you to tell them the story of Aladdin, you'll face a choice: perpetuate the sanitized version or find age-appropriate ways to honor the original function of folktales, not merely to entertain, but to warn, to witness, and to remember what others would prefer we forget. Perhaps the most haunting aspect of this buried narrative is how it continues to resonate with contemporary realities. Child exploitation hasn't vanished, it has merely changed forms. The mechanisms of power that Galland encoded in his tale continue to operate today. By sanitizing Aladdin, we haven't defeated the sorcerer. We've simply made him invisible, allowed him to operate unseen while we distract ourselves with comfortable fantasies of wishes granted and happy endings assured. The true origin of Aladdin isn't found in ancient Arabia or even in Galland's France, but in the darkest capabilities of human beings across time and culture. When we confront this origin honestly, the tale transforms from exotic entertainment to urgent warning, a record of atrocities witnessed, encoded in narrative form to bypass the censors of both government and conscience. What if, instead of burying this function beneath entertainment, we recovered it? What if we allowed our cultural stories to serve their original purpose? to speak difficult truths in forms we can bear to hear. The next time you encounter the familiar blue genie, the magic carpet, or the street rat with a heart of gold, remember, you're not seeing the authentic tale, but its systematic erasure. The true story of Aladdin isn't about wishes granted, but about witnessing honestly what we wish didn't exist. And in that truth lies not entertainment, but the beginnings of real magic, the power that comes from facing darkness squarely rather than disguising it with comfortable lies. That is the lamp's true power, not granting wishes, but illuminating what others have tried to keep hidden in darkness.